One of the things that we've always tried to do here at Leica is to tell different kinds of stories in different genres. I'm really excited about telling different kinds of stories, diving into different kinds of themes, bringing different visual aesthetics to the screen. I don't want to repeat ourselves thematically, visually. And so the thing with Missing Link is that it felt like a very different kind of story, the kind of thing that we hadn't done before. And that's one of the things that gets all of us in this company excited. To visually do something new and distinctive and interesting, but also to dive in a different aspect of what it means to be human. Fundamentally, the film is really about connectivity. It's about empathy. It's about moving from isolation to connection, and it's a really potent emotional story at the core of it. And yet, on the top of it, we put this beautiful veneer of this incredible swashbuckling adventure that goes back to Jules Verne and Indiana Jones and things like that. It's a really cool turn of the century adventure story with monsters, and I thought that was a really exciting story to tell. Missing Link is by far our most ambitious film. Essentially a travelogue that goes across the world. We start in all these different kinds of locations, which when you're essentially shooting these movies in what amounts to a big warehouse, to make it look like you're gallivanting all across the natural world can be challenging. A lot of times stop motion tends to look like it's shot on a tabletop because it effectively is. But for this film to have the feeling that we wanted to evoke, we needed to go across the globe in all different kinds of environments, which meant that we had to build places, environments, locations that we'd never thought of before, that we'd never designed before. The natural world is difficult to replicate in this medium, and this film was littered with that. And so there were so many different locations that we don't repeat, we don't go back to. Every new sequence, we're going somewhere new. And producers hate that kind of thing because it means we have to design and build new locations all throughout the movie. But it was what the movie required. The film is on some level about discovery, and part of that is the discovery of new locations as well as kind of the emotional discovery that our characters go through. There's the old saw that directing is 90% casting, and I think in this case that's certainly true. We were spoiled for choice here in this film with our leads. We've got Hugh Jackman playing Sir Lionel Frost, we've got Zach Galifianakis playing Mr. Link, and then of course we have Zoe Saldana playing Adelina Fortnight. They're all extraordinarily gifted actors, but they're also incredibly funny, individually and together. The film has a big, warm, gooey heart, and that is really centered in Mr. Link, played by Zach. And he's just so naturally funny. You get him in the recording studio, and he'll read what's there, but he's always riffing. He will not give you the same line reading twice, which is really exciting for a director and a producer as you're trying to craft the performances in the film. Oftentimes, you're in the recording studio, years before you're actually shooting anything, and it gives you when you have an actor like that can ad lib, that can bring so much invention and their own creativity to the performance. It gives you a lot of different choices for making the character really fully come alive, through the voice. But then that inspires the animators to give the character that much more vitality when they're bringing them to life with their hands. Missing Link comes from the tradition of grand adventure stories. Chris and I grew up in the same era, and so we have a lot of the same childhood loves and obsessions. Indiana Jones being, one of the foremost ones. It's that it really is a perfect film, and this film is meant to be evocative of that kind of story. It's a globe-trotting swashbuckler, and those films always had a ton of fun, great visual invention, and great adventure action set pieces, but also had something pretty potent emotionally at the core, and that was something that we wanted to tap into, those great action adventure stories of our youth and childhood, and bring it to a new era with our own unique Leica spin. One of my favorite action scenes in the film is the fight that takes place on the boat, this raging storm at sea, where the boat is shifting around as there's this big chase and a fight, and there's peril as our characters are potentially tumbling over the railing into the water. It's the kind of action scene that we've never done before, and it's really cool. It's got so many different layers happening at any given moment. Visually, it's incredibly interesting, and it was challenging to pull off. But then there's also another layer of comedy and peril, and then the music on top of that, which really does bring about the emotion of the scene. It was a really challenging scene to pull off, but I think it's a ton of fun to watch. And I think, for me, probably the other scene that's incredibly exciting to watch is the scene that takes place on the ice bridge towards the end of the film. It's towards the climax of our movie, and it's kind of classic cartoon physics involved in that, but it's also, you really feel the peril, and it's just really beautifully choreographed and shot. The animation is extraordinary, and it's just a real joy to watch. With every film, we try to do something with the production design that feels like it's woven from the thread and the fabric of the themes and the intent of the movie. This film is meant to be kind of this kaleidoscopic riot of color. It's essentially a vibrant travelogue of, as we're going across the world. It has a real warmth at the center of it, and we wanted that to be reflected in the palette. It's really punchy, it's bold, it's bright, it's colorful, and it's something that people don't typically associate with stop motion animation. I think stop motion people generally think of as something that's kind of dark and bleak and oppressive and gothic, and certainly there are stories that have been told in the medium using that kind of palette and aesthetic. But this film was a different kind of a movie, and it was a much more bright, colorful, fun adventure story, and it felt like it called for that kind of design, that kind of color palette, and so it just naturally came about because of the overall themes and the emphasis of the movie, and it just kind of just sprouted from that. You get back into the history, what the missing link is. It's something that that takes us from one phase of our evolution to the next, and it's fundamentally about connectivity, about the link between us. It's about a character and multiple characters actually who move from isolation to connectivity, who are effectively alone and lonely, and how they can find their place in the world with people who are in some ways very much like them, but in a lot of ways are nothing like them at all. And I think that when we live in a very fractured world where people are going to their respective corners and throwing mud at each other, the idea of finding commonality in people from disparate backgrounds is really fundamentally what this film is about. And I think it's really what the kind of story we've always tried to tell at Laika, is the idea that getting to the core feeling of empathy, the idea that we all touch the same surface, that we're all connected in some way, and that those things that divide us are less important than the things that bring us together. And that really is the core element of what this movie is about. It's about finding your place, it's about finding where you belong, and it's about finding commonality and love and friendship and fellowship. And I think it's just really a beautiful story that is particularly resonant given our fractured times. When I think about how stop motion has evolved over the last century, it's pretty remarkable to see the quick how rapidly it's advanced in the last 10-15 years. Essentially, with what we've tried to do at Laika, which is to take the foundation of this style of filmmaking, which is craft-based. It's about artists using their hands to bring something to life, and blending that with technologies. That was something that wasn't really an emphasis in the medium before, and it's something that we've tried to blend together. That we've created this meld of these things, and what it's done is it's allowed us to tell the kinds of stories that we couldn't even imagine a handful of years ago. You look at Coraline, and that was the first thing that we'd ever done, and it was incredibly ambitious for the time, and it's beautifully cinematic. It's also very theatrical, but it's relatively contained. It's a very contained story. This film spans the entire globe with multiple characters and all kinds of different action sequences with different colors and environments and monsters and all these different things that would have been impossible to achieve when we first started. And because every film that we do stands on the shoulders of the ones that precede it, we grow in our technology and our creative capacity and our artistic ability with every successive film, which means a film like Missing Link, which would have been impossible to even contemplate a handful of years ago, is now something that we can pull off with some aplomb. I'm a huge fan of the Walkmen, which is Walter Martin's previous group, and he's just such an interesting songwriter, musician. We were trying to find a song that fit the thematic of the main themes of the movie, And so, you start going through your own record catalog and trying to find just the right song. And in the end, we decided that we'd have to craft something specifically for the movie. And Walter wrote us this very beautiful song that's really about, the main themes of the movie, about fellowship, about friendship, about, loving relationships between people. And it's also incredibly catchy. It's a ton of fun. It just gets kind of stuck in you. And it also feels like it's woven from the overall threads of the film, which it does not feel like it's a pop song that we kludged onto the movie. It feels like this song could have been written and performed in the era that the film was set, which was incredibly important, that it all feels like it's part of the same overall approach. And it's just a beautiful and really fun song. I think that we want people to be transported. We want people to have a good time, to enjoy themselves, to see something new at the cinema, to be excited by the story that we're telling. But I think beyond that, the core theme of empathy is the most important one, which is the very idea that when you watch a story, when you experience someone else's story as if it were yours, you can't help but come back from that experience somewhat changed. You can't help but feel like you're more connected than when you first began, and that's the core of this movie. And I think that cinema is one of the handful of art forms that can actually bring that to the surface, that actually remind us of the shared humanity that we all experience. And I think that as fun as this is and as exciting as it is to watch, that's the thing I'm most proud of, is that at its very core, it's a film about the things that bind us together. Comedy is extraordinarily hard to pull off, and it is so completely subjective. I mean, something that I find funny might not be something that anyone else finds funny. But I think that, it starts first and foremost with the characters and with the writing. And Chris Butler is an extraordinary writer. He's a naturally very funny, witty, clever guy. And so I think the humor in this movie works on a number of different levels. It's very clever. There's some really interesting wordplay, and the repartee between the characters feels sort of like a madcap comedy. And there's also a lot of physical humor, and I think that's why we try to work these things in layers, so that for the kids who are maybe not going to get the verbal sophistication of some of the jokes, that there is some really nice, fun visual and physical comedy that the characters are involved in. And then, for the older members of the family, for the adults, for the grandparents, there's a lot of really incredible verbal wit that's on display. And when you can bring those things together, we can have all members of the family experience a film and enjoy it and draw different things out of it together. That's really what we try to do, to create these shared communal experiences, and I think this film does that. We were trying to find an actor who could bring to life Mr. Link in a way that maybe you wouldn't expect. I think he is an unexpected choice. You see this big hulking mass of fur, and you don't necessarily think that the voice that's going to come out of that monster is going to be this sweet, warm voice that Zach just naturally has. And he's just so quirky and unusual, and he's got a very strange way of looking at things and bringing those observations to life in a way that maybe was really unexpected. His choices are always very things you wouldn't predict. You lay these things out, and you have certain expectations of how these things are going to be performed. And the thing that always throws you when you're piecing these things together is when an actor or an artist comes aboard and they have a completely different interpretation of what the material is that maybe you didn't expect, maybe you didn't anticipate, but all of a sudden just elevates the material to a different plane. And I think that's absolutely what Zach Galifianakis did with Mr. Link.